Pause for a second and listen to the voice inside your head right now. What does it sound like? When it tells you that you're falling behind, that you need to push harder, that you're not quite smart enough or attractive enough, whose voice is actually speaking? We go through life assuming our inner monologue is a private sanctuary, a completely original reflection of who we are. It speaks in our cadence. It uses our vocabulary, so we never question its origin. But the unsettling truth of human psychology is that you have been hacked since the day you were born. That critical narrator in your mind? It isn't actually you. It is a masterclass in psychological camouflage. For decades, your nervous system has been quietly recording the impatience of a parent, the anxiety of a teacher, the subtle rejections of peers, and the relentless pressure of a hyper-competitive world. You absorbed their stress, downloaded their expectations, and mistakenly labeled it my personality. The thoughts you consider your deepest, most intimate identity are largely foreign code, an inherited operating system running quietly in the background, making you feel a sudden wave of guilt every time you try to rest. And until you learn how to spot the malware, you will spend your entire life fighting an enemy that wears your face. Level 1. Think back to the earliest years of your life. Long before your brain developed the cognitive firewall needed to say, wait, that's not true, you were essentially a biological recording device. You didn't just learn about the world, you downloaded the entire operating system for reality directly from your parents and caregivers. But you didn't just absorb their spoken rules, you absorbed their nervous system. You recorded the tension in their jaw when they opened a bill. You internalized the panicked silence at the dinner table. If a parent constantly braced for disaster, your young brain wired itself for hypervigilance, assuming the environment was inherently hostile. If their love felt conditional, tied to your achievements, your mind silently linked perfectionism with pure survival. Their unspoken anxieties became your default physical reactions. Their unfulfilled ambitions, the dreams they gave up on, were passed down to you as a heavy, unexplainable pressure to constantly prove your worth. You never consciously consented to these mental frameworks. They were installed onto a completely blank hard drive, written into your code before you even knew how to think. This is level 1. It is the invisible architecture of everything you believe today. When you feel a sudden irrational spike of anxiety, or a crushing guilt for simply sitting still, you assume it's a flaw in your personality. But often, it isn't you at all. It's just the echo of someone else's unresolved stress, running quietly in the background of your life. Level 2. When you entered the school system, your psychological programming was suddenly industrialized. You were dropped into an environment where your nervous system learned to obey the sound of a bell. You were taught to suppress your baseline impulses, waiting for permission to speak, to move, to simply exist in a space. Because pure curiosity is inefficient for standardized testing, your brain had to adapt. Its reward circuitry was quietly hijacked. Dopamine stopped firing from the thrill of discovery and started firing only from external approval, a high grade, a gold star, a nod from an authority figure. Your entire sense of worth was outsourced to an arbitrary point system. In this environment, a mistake was no longer just an interesting piece of data. It was a threat to your social survival. Your body learned to flood with cortisol at the thought of giving the wrong answer in front of 30 peers. And so, the internal shift happened. The voice in your head stopped asking, "Why does this work?" and started asking, "Is this what they want?" The chaotic, brilliant curiosity of a child was paved over, replaced by a new inner narrator, a hypervigilant, anxious student, constantly terrified of stepping out of line, treating the rest of your adult life like a never-ending exam you haven't studied for. Level 3. At level 3, your personal history collides with a perfectly engineered cultural machine. It wasn't enough that early life taught you to perform for approval. Now, you step into a society built entirely around monetizing that exact vulnerability. Every screen, every algorithm, every carefully curated lifestyle aesthetic is designed to bypass your rational mind and plug directly into your deepest, unhealed insecurities. You start experiencing a phenomenon known as mimetic desire. You begin wanting things not because they naturally align with who you are, but because you've watched everyone else want them. Suddenly, you find yourself chasing a highly specific, socially approved version of happiness. You obsess over career milestones you don't actually care about. You try to replicate morning routines you saw online, mistaking consumption for identity. You exhaust yourself acquiring the right markers of success, the right clothes, the right relationship dynamic, the right neighborhood, genuinely believing that if you just gather enough external proof, the internal void will finally close. It's a brilliant, tragic, neurological trap. Your brain's dopamine system gets hijacked, confusing the brief thrill of acquisition with actual psychological safety. But these aren't your desires. They are beautifully packaged scripts, installed to keep you endlessly consuming, forever striving, and predictably conforming. The ultimate illusion of level 3 is that you think you're building your dream life, when in reality, you're just executing a program. Level 4. At level 4, the tension breaks into a cold, uncomfortable clarity. You begin to observe your own mind not as a unique identity, but as an algorithm. You realize the terrifying extent of your mental automation. When you suddenly back out of a risk or dilute your own opinion to keep the peace, pay attention to what is actually happening. You aren't deciding, you are executing a script. Your imposter syndrome, your chronic overthinking, and your quiet, desperate need for external validation are not innate personality traits. They are inherited survival programs running on an infinite loop. They are legacy code. Every time you self-sabotage, it is not your true self making a choice. It is an overactive psychological immune system violently protecting its host from the perceived ancient danger of standing out, of failing, or of being fully seen. And here lies the profound irony of this stage. You pride yourself on your individuality, yet you are essentially living as a supporting character in a narrative written by dead generations and modern marketing executives. Your fears are echoes of your ancestors' scarcity. Your desires were manufactured in a boardroom to sell you a cure for an insecurity you didn't even know you had. Our nervous system acts out a conditioned reflex, and milliseconds later, our conscious brain invents a rational-sounding excuse to justify it. It's not the right time. Or, I just need to do more research. This is the ultimate trap of level 4. The illusion of free will is the exact chain keeping you tied to the post, because you cannot rewrite a program as long as you still believe it is your personality. Level 5. At level 5, the conditioning is no longer a habit. It is the operating system itself. You believe you are the conscious architect of your adult life. You sit down, weigh the pros and cons, and assume you are making decisions out of pure logic and personal preference. But in reality, your nervous system has already rigged the game. Long before your conscious mind even enters the room, your brain has filtered out any path that feels unfamiliar, risky, or exposed. You aren't making free choices, you are simply ordering from a pre-approved menu handed to you by your earliest conditioning. This deeply embedded code governs the invisible ceiling you place on your own self-worth. It dictates the quiet, unfulfilling career path you tolerate because it doesn't trigger your fear of failure. It orchestrates the toxic relationships you accept because your brain misinterprets familiar chaos as safety. Even when things go right, the software intervenes. The moment you step outside your permitted zone of success or happiness, a subtle, creeping anxiety kicks in. You suddenly feel the urge to procrastinate, pull back, or pick a fight, creating an artificial crisis just to drag yourself back to the emotional baseline you know how to survive. And that is the ultimate tragedy of level 5. The system doesn't fail. It works flawlessly. It does exactly what it was designed to do, ensuring you remain completely predictable, heavily defended, and deeply, quietly unfulfilled. You don't realize you are a captive. You cannot see the bars of the cell, because the bars are constructed entirely out of what you call your own personality. Ending. So, how do you actually break out of a prison that is constructed entirely out of your own thoughts? Most people try the intuitive approach. They start an argument. They try to forcefully replace negative thoughts with positive ones. They attempt to outthink their own overthinking. But using your frantic mind to fix your frantic mind is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The real answer is much simpler and initially deeply uncomfortable. You must first realize that for most of your life, you have never actually thought for yourself. That relentless, critical, anxious narrator in your head, it's not you. Your mind has been colonized. That internal monologue is an aggregate. It's a downloaded script. It's the lingering echo of a stressed parent, a critical teacher, a panicked society, and a dopamine-driven culture designed to keep you constantly on edge. It is a survival mechanism running on outdated hardware, constantly scanning for threats and labeling that chronic tension as your personality. True intellectual and emotional freedom doesn't begin when you finally win the argument against yourself. It begins in the terrifying, liberating moment you drop the rope entirely. You stop identifying with the noise. You realize that your brain is simply an organ that secretes thoughts, just like your glands secrete hormones. And you do not have to believe every automatic reflex it generates. The moment you step back and simply observe that foreign voice watching it spin, panic, and demand your attention, you take your power back. You can finally start writing your own code instead of blindly running someone else's malware. Because the ultimate psychological truth is this: the real you is not that frantic voice speaking. The real you is the vast, quiet space that is listening.